Glug glug. Yeah, me too. Welcome to my game dungeon. Today I have for you two fantastic shmups, CosmoDreamer and Dreamer. Dreamer has a space in its title and CosmoDreamer doesn't because Dreamer otherwise lacks space. Yeah, it's a shmup episode. I'll get back to fishing games eventually, I'm just swapping the madness of one hemisphere for another. I got Dusk lined up next anyways. Shmups are a genre with a weird reputation. I've never seen anyone who vocally dislikes them, yet they seem oddly niche and unpopular amongst the average Joe. I think people just tend to be intimidated by the genre's overarching reputation. Certainly doesn't help when every bullet hell video has that one guy leaving a comment about dodging rain. It's funny the first time, but it's so ubiquitous that it may as well be an anti-shmup psyop. Still, if my only exposure to the genre is a video of Dodonpachi's side-eye ojos and bocce, say that 3 times fast, free from the knowledge that it took a decade to be beaten without cheats, then yeah, I'd probably be scared off too. I also think there's a sensory overload side to this, and not solely because there's a lot of bullets on screen. The genre is popular in Japan, so therefore it's acquired a bit of their unique, lovable charm. I'm sure Cho Anarchy is familiar to strange or surreal game enthusiasts in the audience. It's an acquired taste. This footage should say enough, though the soundtrack is another layer of zany that I'll spare you from. The extremes in this genre can be ridiculously extreme, but luckily for you, today's games only have a few light-speed washing machine tilt-a-whirl wedgies from hell, and there's only trace amounts of that trademark obscure Japanese game outlandishness. They still have nutty moments and quirks, they're just exceedingly few and far between. Beyond those fleeting moments, CosmoDreamer and Dreamer are among the most approachable bullet hells out there. I would highly recommend them, regardless of whether you're a hardened rain dodger or the equivalent of a slug trying to outrun a 50 BMG round. There's a lot to be impressed by here, from the shot type customization to the fantastic balancing to the surprisingly charming audio-visual design. They're a chimera of a lot of other shmups, but in the best way possible. An adaptation of a lot of the fun mechanics and gimmicks from the likes of Toho and Cave titles. I can tell these games are made by a huge fan of the genre, and though the references can be a bit obvious, that's otherwise a great feeling to have. Speaking of which, these two titles are the work of one man, or perhaps woman, or perhaps goat, nicknamed Outside. They're an experienced shmup developer with more titles under their belt than you can shake a stick at. One made out of bullets or something, I don't know. I've left a link to their free M page in the description below. Now, I should mention that this video is going to be unusually formatted by my standards. CosmoDreamer and Dreamer both have a lot more in common than just their developer and titles. In fact, they're borderline the same game, but with sporadic key differences in design and direction. If you ever struggle to tell them apart, well, you shouldn't be having that problem in the first place because both titles literally have their title in the top right. Most of what I'm going to say will apply to both games, however, I will specifically single one of them out when necessary. As for acquiring these games, they're both on Steam and the Nintendo Switch, making these the first multi-platform games I've covered since Prey 2006. For the sake of this video, I'll be focusing on the Steam versions. On sale, you can get both of them for about 15 bucks in total. They run perfectly out of the box on modern systems. Specifying that may seem redundant, but have you seen what I've covered? And all the configuration options you'd hope for are present. Rebinding controls, VSync, adjusting bullet visibility, changing the window size, etc. So these random indie shmups respect PC users more than most big budget titles, as per usual. Like, is there any surprise there? There's a monstrous number of AAA titles I can viciously mock here, but I'll skip it's better than Splinter Cell Conviction. Now, to quickly get story aside, it's super minimalist in both games. CosmoDreamer has you playing as this extremely purple anime girl, Mu, who is named after the most powerful word in Tokipona. Okay, wait, Palisa goes pretty hard too. Mu is stuck in a nightmare and late for school, so logically she must fight dream versions of her friends to escape. And that's pretty much it. There's no explanation for this, as not one line of dialogue is exchanged throughout the entire campaign. Much like in real life, bullets speak louder than words, so this is completely fine by me. I guess it's appropriate that a dream-themed game has a story that's hard to make sense of, though even a dream I once had about milking a male jackalope had some rhyme and reason to it. Dreamer, on the other hand, has you playing as one of 3 gals, Vanilla Alice, Yuri Coco, or Ujako. All 3 of them are vying for the title of queen of a bullet hell-themed social media site. They need to defeat the queen in order to become the queen, so it's a Santa Claus situation. You know, I would actually use social media if it was like this. Unlike its predecessor, Dreamer does have dialogue, but it's usually only 3 or 4 lines per stage that go faster when they come and don't interrupt the gameplay. It's unanimously a blink and you'll miss it exchange of goofy insults leading into the bullet hell mandated trading of blows between two husky anime girls. This is a cornerstone of the genre, and while I'm not necessarily fond of it, Like Dreamer tends to be fast-paced and goofy rather than long-winded and dry, which is definitely preferable for a bullet hell. So again, lighter on story than the coloring book, you're ultimately here to dodge bullets and blow things up. Both of these titles respect that and don't have the horrifically boilerplate or cringeworthy dialogue you see in most other bullet hells, especially ones of this style. I'm not going to call the writing brilliant or anything, but it's succinct, amusing, and unintentionally racist at one point. Turns out the racist dialogue was cut out or at least retranslated at some point in development. Shame, it really added to Yujako's character. It's mostly surprising it didn't come from Yuri, who definitely seems like the kind of woman to constantly have racial slurs on her clipboard. I appreciate this a lot more than the Wattpad Reader X fanfiction level quality writing you usually see in bullet hells, so this minimalism is a big plus for me. That's effectively all there is to say about the story. Yeah, it was truly deep and introspective this time, only lacking the furries. So let's move on to the gameplay by starting with one of the series' most appealing gameplay features, the shot type customization. For your shot type, you have 4 slots in total. The first 2 slots represent your unfocused and focused shots, respectively. Focusing works like it does in most other Toho adjacent shmups, where holding down shift concentrates your shots and slows down your character. Your options for each of these are largely traditional shmup fare, ranging from homing to forward focus to wide spreading to hocus pocus. In CosmoDreamer especially, you have a lot of agency over how you want your shot to function. If you want a homing shot while focused and a tight forward facing shot when unfocused, you can do that. It's an open world game, you can do whatever you want, so long as you don't know what open world means. You can really optimize your shot type to your preferred playstyle, with every shot option serving a unique niche. Some shots shoot their shot mildly shootier than others, but there's no traps nor free wins. Impressive, considering how remarkably badly shmups with fewer preset options can screw this up. All of this combined creates a stronger sense of freedom than usual for a shmup. Personally, I usually found myself most comfortable with widespread plus forward focus hybrid shots, so you'll probably see a lot of those in this video, but your favorite options would likely vary from mine. Varying your shot is half the fun in these games, so go wild. The C slot is your bomb, referred to as dreams or mental. Yeah, that's a mental way to refer to bombs. I wouldn't dream of it. These greatly vary in your purpose and potency. This series is a bit more intent on gimmicky bombs than average, which is nice. There's numerous defensive bomb options for those who prefer that, and you have the sporadic oddity like Yuri's bomb that's basically a hyper with no defensive use at all. That being said, you can't go wrong with a good old screen nuke. CosmoDreamer in particular offers what is inexplicably one of my favorite bombs of all time, next to the SAR bomb, a Ziki bomb, Morbius, and a Unibomb. Violently exploding and melting cute critters alive isn't usually dissatisfying, though I know how to have fun on Saturdays. Maybe it's just me, but bombing can feel like a failure of sorts in shmups. Here that can be the case, though they're plenty explosive and bombastic as a consolation. I didn't get sick of this. It's worth mentioning that you only hold 3 bombs at a time, a fairly low number by shmup standards, but they're easily replenished through pickups or by charging a circular bar around your character, which is slowly filled up by dealing damage. This means you don't always have to save your bombs for a rainy day, though you do want to try holding onto them, especially in the later game. Speaking of rainy days, by the way, making this video has been more of a mess than usual. I think it's a great system, offering you solid long-term survival while also not letting you just bomb your way through late-game bosses like you can in the likes of Toho. Bombs are also connected to your D slot, insert funny joke here, which is a passive slot relating to the shield mechanic. The shield is effectively an auto-bomb system, and its girth depends on what you fit into the D slot. The default option here boosts the efficiency of your shield, meaning that you automatically trade a single bomb in exchange for surviving a hit. I'm not especially great at bullet hells. I wouldn't call myself bad, as I have a good few clears under my belt, but I'm generally not quite hard mode material. So I personally really love these default auto bombs because they help me stay relaxed and focused on dodging. Do note that it's a double-edged sword for new players, as you do want to try building up your bombing instinct for other shmups without auto bombs. Death bombing is a feature, so not having to think about getting the timing on that right is nice, even if the shield auto bomb is a circle of tickles in comparison to regular bombs. You can also choose to boost one of your 2 shots at the cost of an inefficient shield, or forego the shield entirely in favor of buffing both of your shots. The latter of which is definitely an expert option and shouldn't be selected unless you know what you're doing, and you have the optimal bullet hell recommended amount of beer in your veins. I really like this system as well, as it lets the player choose between safety or damage output. I naturally go for defense, but hey, if you want to be better at mopping the screen, you can always opt for that too. Now, there are some noteworthy key differences with this system between the two games. Starting with CosmoDreamer, you have 3 options and 4 slots for a potential 81 combinations in total by default. Clear the whole campaign in one go and you unlock a new quirky option in each slot, raising the total number of combinations up to 256. CosmoDreamer's shots are remarkably well balanced, with the only weak option being the flares, which are probably targeted towards the weirdos who default to Yomu, as it needs to be charged up. If you can find out the ancient NASA secret behind a flare shot, then don't let me know, because I hate charge shots and won't use it anyways. Like Dreamer carries forth the same general shot customization system, though with most options being restricted to certain characters. For instance, only Alice gets the homing rockets and only Ujako gets a weird familiars that lock in place. Like Dreamer is definitely heavier on gimmicky shots, and while I'm not a huge fan of gimmicky or high skill floor shots in shmups, they're still quite viable and even situationally unrivaled in terms of potency here. The possible shot combinations are overall lower than in CosmoDreamer at 96 in total, but it does give each playable character a unique identity while still offering more wiggle room than most other shmups. I should also mention that these games do not have power mechanics. In other words, there's no potential snowballing downwards because you made a typo on your tax returns. Hypers aside, you will always deal the maximum amount of damage your shot configuration can deal. Losing lives and bombs upon being hit is punishment enough. Your attack getting weaker on top of that is objectively bad game design, especially if it takes a long time to reaccumulate that power. So I love that these two games ditch power as a mechanic. This opinion may be heresy in bullet hell circles. I'm more of a spectator sort, so I wouldn't really know, but I'm going to fiercely stick to my shots here. First-person shooters don't make you deal less damage because you took damage, and the exceedingly rare exceptions are memes, so to me it doesn't fly in other genres either. It's just one of many nice player considerations these games give you that other developers seem to be terminally afraid of. These games want to be fun more so than they want to be stereotypically hard as nails, though they still whip out the femur breaker now and again, so it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Regardless of which of these two games you're playing, the shot types are quite well balanced. CosmoDreamer does favor its homing and bouncing shots a bit, but a forward focus shot still pierces anime girls well, and the one boy too, who is naturally androgynous since, well, it's a bullet hell and blatantly male males are forbidden. That aside, depending on how you like to play bullet hells, your shot choice will wildly vary. Every option excels at something while also being weaker at something else. Some attacks are easier with a bouncy shot, others may be easier with a piercing forward focus shot. And like I said, quirky shots are largely just as usable as regular shots, and even the flares, which do as much damage as indoor fireworks, have a vague niche thanks to their piercing and screen coverage. Now, I have been exaggerating my disdain for the flare shot. The thing is, I've realized over halfway into editing this video that it was a ridiculous sleeping giant, which is funny because flares don't sleep. Under normal circumstances, I'd cut out the bits where I suggest it's bad, but I think my gradual character arc realization that it's quite potent emphasizes how well considered the shots are in these games. Here's a trick to it. You fire a flare and quickly unfocus to swap to your other shot, dealing the damage of both shots at once. I really stumbled my way through that, but it's really good if you pair it with a forward focus, unfocused shot. I don't know if there's an agreed upon name for shots like this, but I've heard it informally termed as a malice cannon. It also helps if you know that letting go early unleashes a flare that is smaller in radius but effectively unchanged in damage. Yeah, that's pretty huge actually. The flare shot is still tricky to use, but proper use of it can one-cycle numerous boss attacks, easily wipe out boss familiars, if you know what you're doing, and trivialize denser formations, so it's viable, fun, and different. I felt the same way for Ujako's lock-in-place focus shot, where she leaves her shooty bits in place like they're a kid and she needs to quickly head out to grab milk. I thought it was wonky at first. Then I gave it a more extensive spin in practice and realized how much of a monster it can be. I ended up getting my first clear both a campaign and extra stage with it. It was a blind clear of the extra stage at that. Honestly, I don't think there's a single shot type that isn't viable, only a few that take more getting used to than others. It's fantastic stuff all around. I had a lot of fun experimenting the shots, and thanks to how easy it is to pop open practice, arm my anime girl, and take her for a test drive, it never felt inconvenient to find out what clicked for me. Practice mode is an extremely welcome feature, and it's great that you have control over so many parameters, though I do wish it would let you skip the specific boss attacks and save replays. I don't know, practicing attacks later in extra bosses is kind of a pain. It was a genuinely fun experience finding out what my favorite shots were. Overall, I adore the customizable shots, and I really hope that any future games in this series go absolutely hog wild and let me create the most unhinged, goofy shots I can think of. This kind of system is such an easy sell for me, and is half the reason why I love Brilliant Pagoda or Haze Castle so much, in spite of it being, well, Brilliant Pagoda or Haze Castle. Even if these two games lack the madness from that one, I still love this markedly saner take on such a system. The amount of replay value it adds is almost sky high. Ultimately, it's a fun system that shows up in far too few bullet hells. It greatly helps elevate these two games above most other shmups, at least in my mind. Okay, we're out of shot customization. We can talk about the rest of the gameplay. Well, if it's not clear by now, both of these games are vertical shooters. You're on rails shooting at things that come at you from the top of the screen. Both titles have 10 stages in total, 8 in the main campaign, a secret 9th level, and an extra stage sequestered away from the main campaign, each of which concluding with a boss fight. Initially, you have to play each level individually, but clearing the 8th stage unlocks trial mode. In both games, this asks you to clear the whole campaign in one continuous shot, like most other shmups. Like Dreamer lets you roughly choose a route, but has an alternative mode to play all the stages in one go if you'd like. Dreamer. Either way, both games with all 9 stages clock in at over 50 minutes, so I hope you can endure that. More difficult than actually clearing the campaign is resisting the temptation to mention the ridiculously tiny hitboxes. You can usually pass through the edges of projectiles without getting hit, and your hitbox itself has to be smaller than the white dot lets on. If you told me a player hitbox is 1 pixel, I would doubt you, because I think it's more like half a pixel. I squeeze through tight gaps that would make an anorexic cat squeamish. I've always called these lull dodges, and they're a big plus for me with bullet hells. When people talk about hitbox porn, they're talking about something more vanilla than missionary, like ducking under a sword in Dark Souls. Nah, I want to see a 1 pixel hitbox slipping through a physical wall of bullets. That is exciting. I think Jesus once said something about camels passing through the eye of a needle, and he was almost certainly talking about this. And in a similar twist, enemies do not have hurt boxes, so you can freely park your girl on top of them with the only fear being the bullets they spew out. It's still a bullet hell, you just don't need to dodge the sentient spotlights backdooring you, which is a welcome change of pace. In Like Dreamer in particular, you get a hard-coded damage bonus for smooching enemies like this. Nice little bit of encouragement to be aggressive. Both titles have an archetypical point of collection, aka POC, as well, further rewarding players brave enough to charge through the bullet hell with some good vacuum cleaner suckage. Literally, you suck all the items on screen straight to you. A small feature, but one I always love to see. It's just a shame that the POC isn't lower for Yuri. It's a missed opportunity. Between these two titles, the biggest core gameplay difference is that Like Dreamer has a simple hyper system which can be described like operating a car. It's either manually or automatically activated depending on this option in character selection. Avoid oncoming obstacles and hucking out bombs for an extended period of time to charge it up. Eventually, you'll accumulate so much anger that you can unleash it to enhance your bullets, erase projectiles with kills, and clear the path of projectiles as a freebie. All of the American road rage necessities in one convenient package. Humor aside, I have mixed feelings about this mechanic. Hypers are satisfying, sure, I don't think many people argue against it being fun chaos. It's just cheesy, like the Swiss cheese it lets you turn bosses and mobs into. In fact, it's one of the biggest reasons I would call Like Dreamer the easier of these two titles. If you're like me and aren't too fond of how easy mode can make the game sometimes, you unfortunately have to compromise on whether you want to just not use hypers, or if you want to be stuck hypering without any personal input. I feel wrong neglecting game mechanics for a review, so automatic hypers are my choice, but I think this needs a bit of tweaking and rebalancing if it's to show up in future games. As it stands, it's a little overpowered, but maybe it makes Like Dreamer that much better for newbies to the genre. I hope you appreciate my fan art, by the way. Next episode, I'll draw her giving birth. The stage design in this series is upper echelon. There are a lot of aimed projectiles coming at you, yeah, but the stages are very active. Your fingers are gonna get some pretty good cardio. Bad shmup stages tend to have overly frequent, horribly placed dead air, whereas CosmoDreamer and Like Dreamer excel at keeping you on your toes. Constant enemies, dense crowds of popcorn, and a fairly consistent upwards difficulty curve keep the momentum going throughout the entire experience. Something is always happening. It's always getting more difficult, and you're increasingly forced to adapt to the strengths and weaknesses of your shot type. There's plenty of popcorn to pop, a busy week at the movie theater's worth of it. But as a pleasant mix-up, you occasionally get a big mob enemy that spews a relatively complex pattern and grants a satisfying screen wipe accompanied by a blast of point items when you kill them. The moment-to-moment stage gameplay isn't the most innovative or creative thing in the world, yet the excellent balancing and non-stop action make it incredibly engrossing. Plain old aimed projectiles are usually boring. However, if they force you to be active, help the pacing of the stage, and complement or bookend more complex patterns, they can be fun. Who'd have thought? That's not to say there's nothing creative or unexpected in these stages, however. There's plenty to surprise you in a good way. You'll occasionally get a funky little gimmick that you need to deal with. The most substantial example of which is probably the pink mine segment in CosmoDreamer's 7th stage, which is a cute little dodging puzzle unlike anything I've ever seen in a bullet hell before. Sometimes it's more thematic than anything else, like the developer's poorly masked fetish in the Like Dreamer Extra stage. I don't know what it's about, but I'm having fun, so I won't pry too much. It could be innocent, but I'm always caught off guard by this kind of thing. I got VR hooked up recently, so VR game reviews could be on the horizon. I do still need time to adjust to it though, so it's a ways off. I've mostly been playing Hades 3 VR because I adore how left-hand friendly it is. It's the better hand after all. However, I've also been exploring VR chat, where I truly lost my innocence when I learned that some people are into pool inflatables. Surprised I haven't seen many giantesses like this gal in there. People's fetishes are weird. And yeah, sure, fighting a giant enemy throughout a stage is a classical shmup trope, but it's a little weirder with oversized terraformers on the screen shooting bullets at me. What was I saying? Why did I leave this in my script? Oh, right. These little nuggets of variety come at nearly perfect intervals. Non-stop simple patterns alongside the occasional gimmick and bit of complexity are, in my mind, the ideal way to design a shmup stage. And hey, these titles deliver on those things in spades. Sometimes you'll get attacked by a giant baby. Nothing too special, I imagine it happens to most people whenever they leave their house. Well, unlike many other shmups, enemy designs are indicative of their attacks. So whenever this baby appears, you know exactly what it'll do. Thanks to the hodgepodge of themes, every enemy is extremely visually distinct, so the same goes for things like the bees, UFOs, flowers, dog angels, etc. As a result, it's easy to identify an enemy and what it's going to do. If you come from other genres, this may seem like a baseline expectation, but bullet hells have a bad habit where you basically never know what a random mob enemy is going to do until it actually shoots. Will this random stage enemy be equivalent to a comatose octogenarian, or is it going to be freaking John Wick dual-wielding miniguns? I don't know. Well, thankfully, these games don't have that issue, so rejoice. You see what the giant cake shoots at you, you know what it shoots at you. That's that. These stages are low on memorization in general, actually, and you can improvise your way through both of these games. Memorizing a route bores me regardless of the genre. Most of the fun I have in games in general involves charging in with only a vague plan at best. Gives me the biggest rush, you know? So this is outright my favorite way for a shmup to flow, just full embracement of chaos and lots of on-the-fly improvisation. I absolutely dig it, and I wish more shmups in general felt like this. It's definitely a personal preference thing, though. It's no shock that I like immersive sims. I don't think most people will appreciate that pseudo-pun, but oh well. Holy cow, it's Roomba hackery! Bosses are also fairly high quality. CosmoDreamer and Like Dreamer each have their own design direction with their boss fights. The former leans into Toho territory, with bosses often having little gimmicks and puzzle attacks interspersed with standard bullet hell attacks. The variety is high, and even a lot of the simpler patterns have identity and enjoyability to them. For instance, the Stage 2 boss, whose design gives you a flashback or two, has a scissor gimmick. There's an easy joke to be made about a scissor-themed boss in a game with an overwhelmingly female cast, but it's a cute bit of theming that gives her fight memorability that early game bosses don't usually have. It's fair, telegraphed, and flavorful, the big three things you want your gimmicky boss to be. The gimmicks in general are creative and fair, with there only being a couple attacks I would identify as cheap shots. With gimmicky bullet hells, you're inevitably going to have that one BS attack. Cough cough, X mid-boss spell 2, cough cough. Still, I thoroughly enjoy this softcore puzzle battle type of design, and I love CosmoDreamer's extra boss especially. She may be the most fun I've had with a shmup in years. I tend to lose interest in extra stages in these games, but it's bonkers enjoyable in this one. Got an actual adrenaline rush from just barely clutching a victory against her. Thank you, quirky D-Bomb, for just barely letting me score a victory here. With Like Dreamer, that puzzle element is considerably less prominent. If CosmoDreamer is more like Toho, then Like Dreamer is more like a cave game. Here, boss attacks prioritize speed and multifaceted overlapping patterns. Boss attacks in this one may be faster paced than in CosmoDreamer, but there's markedly less trickery and gimmickery going on. Gimmickery is probably not a word, but I want it to be. Bosses usually have these unique opening attacks where they're extra tanky and multi-segmented. Taking down individual segments often damages the boss, intensifies the patterns, or otherwise cripples the attack. Fun, interesting stuff. Strangely, it means that boss fights sometimes go in reverse order of difficulty and complexity, with later attacks usually being markedly simpler than opening attacks. In general, Like Dreamer is what you see is what you get with its patterns, and it has very few subversions and tricks up its sleeve. It's a more arcadey approach, and it sets these two games apart quite well. These funky attacks are one of many reasons why the replay value is sky high all around, in CosmoDreamer as well as Like Dreamer. Hell, Like Dreamer is one of very few games where after beating it for the first time I immediately went back in for another playthrough. It's worth mentioning that both their main campaigns are about 50 minutes long at their longest. Having shot customization and also just being fantastic games in general greatly boosts that replay value as well. Adding further to the replayability is the sporadic moments where bosses branch out a little or hold secrets. Like Dreamer's Stage 7 boss fight lets you choose which cat girl you want to send to the pound and which one you want to send to Poundland. You know, the British store? Whatever. Feel free to add the Choices Matter tag to the Steam store page. Actually, don't, because Steam's community tags are god-awful enough, especially for bullet hells and immersive sims. Certain mid-stage mini-bosses can drop secret 1-ups if you fulfill certain conditions, usually beating them quickly or familiarizing their familiars with your bullets before them. I have mixed feelings about secret 1-ups in general, but they're at least pretty straightforward here. And in CosmoDreamer, the final boss has unique attacks depending on your shot type. I have an extremely specific soft spot for mirror fights like this, where the player's own weapons are used against them, though for whatever reason, this always catches me off guard. I'm sure you can imagine my surprise the first time she shot a flare back at me. It wasn't pretty. Anyways, back to what I was saying. That general lack of trickery does contribute to Like Dreamer being the easier of these two titles. On top of having quirkier attacks in general, CosmoDreamer also asks you to endure certain attacks instead of fighting them out. You're on a timer rather than being able to shoot them down the old-fashioned, pacifistic, violent way our ancestors preferred. Not all of these are awful or obnoxious, but most of them would be improved by being half the length. Some of them are also a bit familiar. Seriously, what are Blazing Star and Clock That Doesn't Tell Time doing here? The latter may just be a vague coincidence, though. I also like the Otohime cameo. There are a decent number of references to other bullet hell patterns in these games, though some may be incidental. This is exactly why humans develop pattern recognition, to identify specific layouts of dense bullets heading straight towards our faces. It technically does lend a survival edge. I typically have mixed feelings about survival attacks and can certifiably say they're the weakest link in CosmoDreamer's pattern design. Their absence in Like Dreamer honestly enhances the game a little. Regardless, to continue my point of Like Dreamer being easier, it's more generous with extra lives, and the hyper system lets you easily accrue score, which are connected to lives. I'm not the score kind of person, so I really can't tell you much about the scoring, but even without a pre-planned route, I can easily get most of the score milestone lives here. Plus, beyond their uses for scoring, hypers obviously add significantly to your survivability and can act as a fourth bomb if you set them to manual. And the bosses and stages are simply easier on average in Like Dreamer. I barely scraped by with my first Maniac clear of CosmoDreamer, whereas I had 7 lives left in Like Dreamer. Both of those runs include a secret stage and therefore the obligate bullet hell over the top TLB. CosmoDreamer's 9th stage is brutal yet fair until you get to the TLB, who is just unfairly brutal. She's a resource drain and therefore badly designed. Such a shame, it's a bit of a brown note to end a fantastic game on. On the flip side, Like Dreamer's 9th stage is largely easier than its 8th stage, if you ask me, and nothing the TLB uses is patently stupid. I had actual fun fighting her, which is an improvement over the TLB in CosmoDreamer, to put it lightly. I don't know, I'm just not a fan of these unfair, over-the-top, really stupid final bosses in bullet hells. If they're gonna be flashy, fine. Just make them fair. Please? I don't know where to slot this in, so I'm hucking it in with the elegance of a gazelle on meth. Both of these games have decent replay features, starring individual stage selection and a fast forward button. It's a leg up over Touhou 19 for sure. A Polaroid camera has better replay features than Touhou 19 though, so these games aren't exactly reinventing the wheel there. On top of all of these things I've mentioned, like customizable shots and the sporadic choose-your-own-adventure boss attacks, the replay value is high overall. There are 4 difficulty modes available in each game, with most of my footage being on Maniac, which is an abnormally intimidating name for normal mode. Though I guess I understand, if you're playing a shmup on anything other than easy, you're probably a little nutty. If being labeled a Maniac's not for you, you've got a laid-back casual mode and 2 lifted front hard modes. Like Dreamer also has plenty of bonuses, such as a boss rush, all stages mode, and a speedrun mode. The speedrun mode is rather unique, as it makes enemy waves come in faster and overlap more, so even if you aren't in it for a good time, it's a good time. The speedrun mode is such a fun spin on the campaign that I wish every shmup had a mode like it. I'm also enamored by counter mode, which can be toggled for any of the other modes. It makes enemies fire aim blue stars at you on death. Despite the simplicity, it's an interesting little mechanic that increases the difficulty surprisingly significantly. It counterbalances hypers in a funky way, because mopping up popcorn quickly can now be dangerous. On the flip side, however, it's more bullets to clear grays and therefore more score. It's a fun, subtle double-edged sword, adding more incentive to use hypers while also making them a bit more risky. Great stuff, and a totally not wonky way to transition into the next section. I've put it off for a while, so let's talk about presentation. Both of these games are what is often nicknamed cute-em-ups. This is an actual legitimate subgenre that I didn't realize had a term until making this video. You think you've seen and heard of everything, but you really haven't. Anyways, the art style is bright, colorful, and somewhat childish in nature. I've heard people describe the art direction as being like that of old Flash games, and I see it. I think that adds to the charm rather than cheapening it. There's a sense of nostalgia without it being pandering, kind of a fresh, modernized spin on that old Flash game style. I do think character faces can look overly squishy and potato-esque, but otherwise I really dig it. CosmoDreamer goes for a whimsical fantasy and space theme. It's communicated best in later stages and by the map screen, which is a cute little thing that is totally absent in Like Dreamer. I'm learning I have a weird thing for map screens in games. Cartography is becoming a favorite ography for sure. Since it's called CosmoDreamer, the underlying space theming is appropriate, though there's unfortunately no Carl Sagan to be found here. Typically, I think outer space is the blandest setting on the planet. Okay, you get what I mean. It's almost impossible to make space interesting. However, the whimsical and surreal styling of CosmoDreamer sells it better than most. It's not a generic soulless space shooter, there's actual charm here. And those giant death babies too. I've heard one of those crashed into Roswell once. Like Dreamer, on the other hand, goes for highly thematic stages with things like a sea stage and a sweet stage. Backgrounds are a lot busier and more complex this time around, but are never distracting, which is both extremely welcome and impressive. Seriously, a lot of other bullet hells have horrible issues with this. Overarching all of this is a vague social media theme. I would bet money it was inspired by Violet Detector. Yeah, sure, Violet Detector is probably the worst official Toho game, but its theming was super original. Score being replaced with social media likes is appropriate in a franchise that may as well be about a bunch of angry women battling to see who can beat Marissa in the annual popularity poll. So it translates well here too. Ultimately, it's mostly a new coat of paint for a lot of typical shmup stuff. Likes in Like Dreamer are like Score and any other shmup like it, and it goes on like that. I thought it would add a layer of obfuscation to the core mechanics, but really it's hardly a big deal, you get used to it. I don't really care that much about scoring in the first place, so you know. Either way, social media themed games are unique. I'll always compliment rare yet cohesive thematic choices like this. Bullet hell is an odd genre that you can elegantly slot into just about any theme. I'm just waiting for horror bullet hell to catch on properly. I can only think of Suzumi and Cacophobia as popular examples of that. Such an untapped well of potential. It helps greatly that bullet visibility is possibly the best of any shmup I've ever played. I never felt like a bullet snuck up on me, never got confused as to what was dangerous or not, and never struggled to distinguish bullets from the backdrop or my own bullets. The worst visual issues with dodging are usually tricky to read curving projectiles, bullets that spawn really close to you, or hypers in Like Dreamer potentially being a tad distracting. Those real projectiles that have curves are absurdly extra rare, and there's also seemingly a safeguard in place to prevent enemies from spawning bullets too close to you when you're low on the screen. So those still aren't really big issues. Plus, no borderless black bullets. The audacity, how fair. Hell, the one and only time bullets with intense homing come up in Like Dreamer, there's a unique warning prompt telling you where they are off screen. It's almost like this game was made by someone who actually respects their players or something. Unbelievable. Speaking of bullets, the bullet types can be memorably quirky. I've shot forks at enemies in Fallout 3, but I've never actually had forks shot back at me. That'll stick in my mind. As far as video game cutlery goes, these are certainly a cut above most. The quirkiness extends to the player and boss sprites and portraits. It's definitely taken a page out of the Toho school of character design, where there's nobody without some form of headgear, hair ornament, or animal ears. Still, it's good character design all around. Colorful, original, highly thematic, and quite varied. You don't get much proper written personality from most of these characters, yet their designs manage to exude quite a bit of personality. Some girls have more personality than others, but we'll bounce onto that in a minute. Besides that, there is same-face syndrome because this series subscribes to anime rules of women being distinguished by their hair color and eye color. Oh well, I guess that's why the Japanese are part of the Axis powers. Stage enemy designs are cute, on top of them being consistently distinct from the background. There's none of that bad shmup stuff where you get sniped from behind by a piece of popcorn armed with a cloaking device. However, they still feel like natural parts of the stages aesthetically. There may be a massive hodgepodge of just random shit coming at you, not even talking about the bullets, but artistically it all just comes together. On rare occasion, enemies do get lost in the late game chaos, especially if you're focused. But hey, that's what homing shots and bombs are for. People who get lost in the pretty colors and shiny orbs, like me. Plus, it's immensely satisfying to see score pop out of enemies and bosses. Visual details like big explosions, gushes of point items, and massive score numbers exploding out of enemies all add to a sensation of satisfying chaos. And even beyond that, both of these games are substantially better than the average shmup at conveniently and easily conveying information to a player in heat of battle. Your life and bomb counters are easy to read, enemy health bars are plainly visible, and plenty of convenient information is constantly displayed around your playable character. You know, how much your next bomb is charged, whether you're invincible or not, how much hyper you have left, etc. These may be bullet hells, but I've played slow-paced point-and-clicks where it was harder to tell what the hell was going on. Almost unparalleled top marks here in terms of visual feedback and readability, not even just among bullet hells, but among games in general. Now at this point, some of you may have noticed at least 2 elephants in a room. Well, maybe not, because I've probably just been covering up some in-joke of some kind. Or maybe multiple in-jokes, I don't know. I don't usually do this, but I'm going to give a disclaimer for the rest of this video. It's not like explicit sexual content, but you'd almost certainly get weird looks if someone saw this over your shoulder. Though I already showed the giantess boss, so... Point is, I'm not going to cover up anymore, so be wary. I've been covering up one of Like Dreamer's playable characters, Vanilla Alice. She looks like this. Keen-eyed viewers may have also realized that she's not alone in this, as a few of the bosses from both of these games have a construction worker level of lifelong crippling back pain ahead of them. I'm not straight enough to appreciate this. In fact, I always hated this sort of thing. It's like if Rob Liefeld was Japanese and drew anime girls instead of freakishly muscular men. I hate both extremes, frankly, though CosmoDreamer Stage 5 boss has the kind of oversized jugs I appreciate. This has to have been intentional, right? Like, come on, the joke writes itself. On the plus side, being a bullet hell, you're going to be more focused on different, less deadly round objects coming at you. Still, it makes it harder to recommend the game to other people. Even amazing bullet hells are hard to convince other people to try, so naturally, couple that with big biodomes at the forefront of the Steam store page, and... well, it's just unfortunate. Comically oversized anime bazingas are a pretty early anime BS cutoff, but it's tricky to ignore in Like Dreamer in particular, especially if you're like me and go for homing shots, and Alice happens to be the homing shot. At least Yuri has one. It is acknowledged, too. It's a major plot point in her ending. Ah well, at least you've got 2 other gals who don't look like rightfully obscure modern-day fertility goddesses. I'm just not a big fan of it. But when this is one of my biggest complaints about the game, we're at least in really good territory overall. Even so, you're, rewarded with a photo of your chosen gal in a swimsuit after clearing the TLB. I mean, yeah, that's rather tame, but it's a little odd and out of place. I don't know who this is intended to appease. Thinking on it later, I appreciate CosmoDreamer sticking to its cutesier tone better, even if Like Dreamer is typically the more aesthetically pleasing game. I'm stapling on last minute that this game has a bonus art gallery. It's what you'd expect for the most part. There's unique art seen nowhere else in the game here. This is also where the deepest lore present is buried, including the one thing they forgot to translate. Lore so deep you need to know Japanese to understand it. But I do like Alice's page on this. I'm glad the developer gave a cannon size for her cannons, though more importantly, I like the subtle joke here that implies she's been repeatedly banned before. I like it when games have content like this just out of the way, easy to miss or forget about, but with obvious care put into it. Just adds to that charming passion project feel. A shmup without great music is like a Family Guy episode with humor. It's 1 in a million. And hey, neither of these games are exceptions. This is the first time in a while I've immediately gone to listen to the music after my first clear. In fact, each game has a fantastic first impression. While you're tweaking your shot, CosmoDreamer gives you an energetic lullaby, and Like Dreamer gives you a fast-paced track that does a decent job generating hype. Usually I forget about main menu themes in games, which is kind of funny to think about actually. It's the first bit of audio that greets you, so surely you'd hope it's memorable. Like Dreamer has an especially killer jingle for its main menu. It got lodged in my head like a bullet, which is bound to happen if you play Bullet Hells, just not for the reasons you'd initially expect. On the off chance you're unfamiliar, shmups, and have reached this point in the video, just know that the music is a gateway drug into the genre. The variety of tracks and genres is quite wide, yet it's always fitting for the chaos unfolding on screen. It ranges from Japanese metal to dubstep's second cousin twice removed, to zany electric pop to whimsical clown music. No two stages have the same mood. There's an interesting, perhaps unexpected reason for the great variety in the music tracks. All of the music is royalty-free and composed by numerous different musicians. It's an astoundingly good selection for the most part, but the real surprise here is that they actually make listenable royalty-free music over there in Japan. Both soundtracks are good, though I ultimately think Like Dreamers is a little better. It has fewer tracks, interestingly, but I think they're a better selection on average. A quality over quantity deal. It's a real shame it hasn't been uploaded in full on the internet as of uploading this video. I particularly want to mention the Stage 8 tracks from both games because holy cow they are good. They'd get anyone pumped up for the finale and have the bonus of being musically timed to the stage. Musical timing is common throughout the stages, it's just that Stage 8 is especially well timed in both games. Even these towers have good choreography. Since I've spent so much time talking about it, I may as well give you a sampler pack of the music. While I'll overwhelmingly sing the soundtrack's praise, a few tracks do stick out to me for the wrong reasons. Here's a snippet of the theme for the secret boss of Like Dreamer. What genre is this? I do like gore shit, so I have the soft spot for this kind of thing, but I genuinely wouldn't know how to describe this to someone. Contrasting this, CosmoDreamer has an eerily calm track for its secret final boss. I have certain expectations for secret boss themes, like terror music, something that builds up and explosively releases, or weird electronic little girl mumble rap thrash metal. You don't hear that last one often for whatever reason. Anyways, this may have been inspired by Mushihime-sama, which has a heavenly choir for its secret boss, so this might be intended to represent ethereal terror rather than classical holy shit terror. Interesting direction, if nothing else. Doesn't really land with me. Oh, also, CosmoDreamer's 4th stage theme sounds like the background track for a YouTuber who wants to sell you shoes that mine Bitcoin. So, great stuff overall with a handful of mediocre or slightly off tracks. Pretty much no major complaints outside of a couple mismatches, but they're still competent tracks nonetheless. I'm leaving out a lot here, mostly because I didn't want to drag the music discussion out for 10 minutes like I have before. There's plenty of great tracks I didn't put here that I suggest you experience in-game for yourself, particularly Like Dreamer's Stage 8 theme. Stage themes that good are stupidly rare, and it wasn't even composed specifically for this game. The greatest shame of it all is how poorly documented a lot of these tracks are. There's no music room in either of these games, so you have to research the tracks for yourself. Except, nobody has really done that, especially in the case of Like Dreamer. In theory, it's likely a lot of these tracks are on YouTube already, but since they're royalty-free tracks and the game lacks individual song credits, well, you'll need to do digging. It's funny in some ways because there's a PC98 arrays of Like Dreamer's extra boss theme on YouTube, but not just the original track? How does that happen? Aren't people usually more obsessive about this kind of thing? If anyone can help document or upload these, it would make you a certified cool guy in the eyes of probably like 5 people. Hey, better than nothing. And while you're busy solving that little mystery, maybe you could also figure out who composed a soundtrack for Battlespire. Far-fetched, I know, but undocumented, uncredited soundtracks always make me a little sad. Beyond the soundtrack, the sound design is fantastic in both titles. If shooting things down in a shoot 'em up isn't satisfying, then it may as well be a sleep 'em up. Wait, I guess CosmoDreamer's story being about dreams technically makes it a sleep 'em up? Well, as a rule of thumb, it's a blast to blast things. Annihilating enemies and bosses never gets old. It feels great to decimate those poor innocent teardrops of propeller heads, cubes of butter, and circus teddy bears? I think I got mugged by one of those once. Everything has distinct sound cues, and almost nothing is grating or overwhelming. There's a pleasant rumble sound when you're hitting things, cues when a boss is aiming at you, and a faint alarm when a boss is getting low on health. All nice conveniences that help with dodging. Bombs sound powerful, and the sound of collecting point items, especially when a boss or horde of popcorn is spewing them out, just feels good. And the sound of point of collectioning a ton of point items? I mean, I don't care much about score, but this is the shmup equivalent of a Garand ping. Positive inflections are in the right places, and it's obviously negative when you lose a life or use an autobomb. The autobomb sound gives me the same vibe as a holy mantle breaking in Binding of Isaac. Any sound design that makes me panic is fantastic. Only one thing stood out as being bad, and it's Alice's B-slot homing missiles. Their lock-on sound effect overlaps a lot for some reason. It gets a little annoying. So beyond that, it's nothing but praise from me here. Great music and great audio. Since this review is literally about to end and I don't have a more elegant transition in mind, consider that the cherry on top of these two beautiful little shootable sundaes. I have fewer concluding thoughts than usual this time around, though I'm typically not the thinking sort. Both CosmoDreamer and Like Dreamer are fantastic titles. Not only are they objectively some of the best games I've covered, but they're easily two of the best shmups I've ever played. Hell, they'd easily land among my top 50 games of all time. I don't exactly have that list compiled, but hey, you can be assured that at least Like Dreamer would show up on there. Ultimately, of these two titles, I do enjoy Like Dreamer ever so slightly more. Each game has its own unique facets, but Like Dreamer is slightly more well-rounded, fine-tuned, and replayable. So if you only get one of these, make it Like Dreamer. However, if you're in it for zany shot customization, gimmicky boss fights, maybe you'll like CosmoDreamer a bit more. Bullet hells are full of personal preferences, and everyone's experience tends to vary. Some like the puzzle battles, some don't. Honestly, this is one of those rare cases where it's easier to recap the few things these games do wrong rather than what they do right. A slightly awkward hyper system, one ridiculous secret boss, a few mismatched music tracks, and oversized bazookas all feel like incredibly petty complaints in the grand scheme of things. These issues utterly pale in comparison to the fantastic boss and level design, unique cutesy art style, great shot customization, largely excellent music selection. For some, certain mountains may be easier to surmount than others, but I think my consensus is a no-brainer. I highly recommend both of these titles. If you're completely new to the genre, you'll have a great time. If you've already grazed more bullets than have been shot in the entirety of human history, you should still have a great time. As long as you don't let your family see you playing as Alice, at least. Sorry, fellow homing shot connoisseurs, sometimes we still somehow miss half of the shots we take. Next time, you know what time it is? Dusk. It's an honorary bullet hell, so it's a fitting follow-up. I'll see you then for some cultist slaying, cigar smoking, jump pad backflipping action horror action. I also have a Viking hack and slash and that one Ubisoft game lined up. You know the one. Toodles! I know people are probably not that interested in the development of my videos, but I do love that my project folder clearly illustrates my descent into madness and despair. At one point in this video, feel free to locate it yourself, there's a quadruple layered insert. I don't think I'll ever be able to top that. Guess that's what happens when I'm really unhappy with one section and unable to rectify it. Here's hoping both my brain and my editing software aren't constantly fighting nor infighting for future videos. That's all. Sayonara, as they say in Costa.